Hi, my name is Morgan and I am a neuroscience researcher, and today we're going to be talking about amnesia. Amnesia is a topic that I think a lot of people are very interested in but probably don't know that much about, and I'm super excited for today's topic because it was suggested to me by Selena. So thank you, Selena, for this topic. And if you would like to recommend a topic or ask a question of a neuroscientist, you could email it to me at askaneuroresearcher@gmail.com, which I'll put right here, and you can also just leave it in the comments below. So today we're going to be talking about a very specific type of amnesia that I'm going to call Hollywood amnesia, which is what Hollywood directors and actors and writers and all of that jazz think amnesia looks like versus what it actually looks like. So to start off, I'm going to talk a little bit about real life amnesia, and then we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about Hollywood amnesia. In real life, there's two main forms of amnesia: retrograde and anterograde. Retrograde amnesia is the one where you have an event of some sort, and then you forget things that happened prior to the event. So think like retro things happen in the past. So you retrograde amnesia, you forget things that happened in the past. Typically, people who have retrograde amnesia, it pertains more to actual memories than what you might call like muscle memory or learned skills. Muscle memory doesn't actually happen in the muscles. I'm going to do a video about that at some point because it irks me. But I think like if someone knew how to play guitar, they would probably remember how to play guitar after this accident, but they might not remember learning to play guitar or the person who taught them how. So different skills versus memories. It can also affect your skills, but typically it only affects memories. It can also be broken down into what type of memory it affects. So sometimes people suffering from retrograde amnesia will forget specifically people or faces, or they'll forget actual whole memories of an event that happened to them. It just depends on what happened. On the other hand, anterograde amnesia is basically the exact opposite. It's instead of forgetting things that happened before an accident, it's the inability to form new memories after an accident. So the most famous example of this is a patient named patient HM. The reason why we refer to him as HM is because back in the day, whenever we were trying to figure out how to both report on patients and write these case reports and talk about specific incidences, but also keep the patient's anonymity and sort of like HIPAA type things, where we don't want to just tell the world, hey, look up this dude, he has these things wrong with him, but we still want to be able to talk about it as an intellectual question. So HM, now that's sort of past. He was a patient for a really long time, and so now we know his real name was Henry Malaysian, but he's most commonly referred to as patient HM. So HM got into a bicycle accident whenever he was 7 years old. And after that bicycle accident, he started suffering from seizures. And his seizures progressively got worse to the point where whenever he was 27, he couldn't hold a job and he couldn't lead a normal life because he was just constantly having seizures. So the doctors of the time offered him a surgery to get rid of seizures. And this type of surgery, I'm not going to say this exact surgery because I couldn't really figure out what exactly the surgery was, but this type of surgery is still done on people with really severe seizures, where we essentially go in and cut the connection between some neurons. That way maybe the seizure will happen still in those specific neurons, but it won't be able to reach the rest of the brain, so it won't be as severe. Really because we still to this day struggle to treat seizures, but especially back in the day whenever this happened to HM. So HM agrees to the surgery. He doesn't want to have these seizures anymore. He wants to be able to lead a normal life. And he developed anterograde amnesia. So HM is not the first patient to ever develop anterograde amnesia. He's not even the first one to develop it as a result of this specific surgery, but he is the one who's been the most studied and the most cited. Some people chalk that up to him just being brutally honest. He would just discuss his condition with anyone who would listen to him, and he had a really good ability to describe what was happening to him. So we know a lot about his brain. So immediately after the surgery, his doctor noticed a couple of changes. First of all, he couldn't remember daily events. The doctor said that he would forget them nearly as quickly as they happened. They would just leave his mind. He would also forget the names of people that he had just met. So in a hospital, you're going through nurses, you're going through different staff. Maybe the doctor checking on you is just the one on call. It's not your actual doctor. He could never remember any of their names. He was able to carry on a conversation, but he would forget the conversation as soon as it ended. So he was able to retain the memory of the conversation for as long as he needed it, and the second that he didn't need it anymore, he would forget it. And then as he got older, he would also begin to underestimate his own age, because really, truly for him, every day that he woke up was the day immediately after his surgery, because he couldn't form a new memory of any sort. So you go in for surgery at 27, one day you wake up and you're 30, but if your last memory was being 27, you're going to remember that you were 27. The case of HM actually inspired one of the movies that is pretty widely regarded as the best example of anterograde amnesia in Hollywood, which is Memento. So before I go any further, I'll be completely honest. I have not seen the majority of the movies that we're going to be talking about. I'm getting a lot of this from a paper that specifically talked about these movies, and I will link that paper in the description box. But I personally have not seen Memento. I could not give you an accurate summary. I know the guy tattoos memories onto his body so that he can read it and figure out what's going on. I think he's being chased by someone. So I'm not going to give it my personal endorsement, but I know that a lot of neuroscientists really believe that this is a great example of anterograde amnesia. So I'll take their word for it. Some things that are praised about the movie: the man develops this anterograde amnesia after he sees his wife killed, which is often a way that amnesia develops, is through a traumatic event. And he doesn't seem to have any personality or identity changes, which is a mistake that Hollywood makes a lot, that we'll get into in a little bit. He also shows fragmented mosaic memory, so he's not totally forgetting every single thing. That's a more realistic form of amnesia versus forgetting every single thing that's ever happened to you. Like I said, it happened to HM, but it's not it's a severity thing. Not every single patient with amnesia is going to forget every single thing that happens to them. Another okay example of amnesia is Dory from Finding Nemo and Now Finding Dory. It's not the best example because she seems to have both anterograde and retrograde, and we never really find out the cause. Maybe she's had this amnesia from the day that she was born, but so that's kind of a little muddy. But it's a great example of the struggle that people with anterograde amnesia face, and also the struggle that people caring for them face, because we want to believe that everyone is this like kind-hearted, good, generous person who, if you had a family or a loved one who developed this amnesia, that you would care for them. But you have to acknowledge that those people also go through their own struggles of dealing with that. I mean, imagine if someone woke up every day not knowing where they were, and you had to tell them where they are, tell them that they're safe, tell them they're fine. It's a struggle on both ends, and it's good to see representation of that. I would also imagine that if you're someone with a child and also a family member or loved one who has amnesia or even Alzheimer's or something that would make them forget things very quickly, I would imagine that Finding Nemo and Finding Dory would be a great way to sort of educate a child and help them understand what's going on. So now I'm going to get on to some of the more movie type things. First of all, what are the causes of amnesia? In real life, amnesia usually has a real neurological or psychological cause. So this is typically brain surgery, like HM, a stroke maybe, or experiencing a traumatic event. In movies, characters often get amnesia from a car accident or a traumatic brain injury of some sort. Like I said, in Memento, he gets it from experiencing a traumatic event, so some movies are a little bit more accurate than others. But I would say of any movie that I've ever seen, the amnesia is typically brought on by, I would say, a traumatic brain injury or a car accident. There was a Nicholas Sparks movie a while back, or I think it was a book and then it was a movie, where a woman got in a car accident and then she forgot her fiance, which was Channing Tatum, and that was a whole thing. But in real life, that's not really what happens. Typically, a car accident, you might receive amnesia from the immediate incident of the car accident. Sometimes people who go through a traumatic event or a traumatic brain injury or something that might affect their ability to remember won't remember the actual event. So you might not remember the actual car crash. But there's not a lot of cases of people who would get in a car accident and then forget everything that happened before the car accident or develop anterograde amnesia. So it happens to a tiny extent, but not nearly to the extent that Hollywood portrays it. These events can also cause some learning issues. So specifically, traumatic brain injury causes a lot of learning deficits. But a learning deficit is not the same thing as amnesia, and a struggle to remember things is not the same as amnesia. Amnesia is forgetting the thing or just not being able to form the new memory, not, I think I remember that guy, it's on the tip of my tongue type thing, if that makes sense. And then there are a lot of movies where they don't even really bother to explain what caused the amnesia, like Finding Nemo and Finding Dory. We have no clue why Dory is that way, she just is. And so that also makes it a little bit difficult to say, well, this is realistic or not realistic, because they didn't explain it. So now let's talk about how amnesia can manifest itself. In real life, this shows up in the form of forgetting things, and so you might forget prior memories, you could forget everything that happened before an accident, you could forget everything that happened after an accident, the anterograde retrograde thing, but that's typically really all that happens. It's just a memory problem. It's not typically anything other than a memory problem. Typically, people who have amnesia are still of a normal intelligence. However smart they were before is approximately how smart they were after. They have a relatively normal attention span. And something that is really important but Hollywood often gets wrong is that their personality and their core identity typically stay intact. They don't really change as a person that much. The real issue and what amnesia really is it's a difficulty to retain memories and retain new information. So like I said, the personality thing is something that Hollywood gets wrong a lot. So an example is that's a pretty common trope to have someone switch from a bad character to a good character as a result of losing their memory, which I think is an interesting thought experiment, because maybe if you don't remember the things that have happened to you in the past, you might have wound up a different person, but that's not how it manifests in real life. So an example of this is that there's a movie called The Crime Doctor, and in Crime Doctor, this shady criminal who's done a lot of illegal things, loses his memory and then becomes a leading criminal psychologist by the end of it and helps catch criminals. For those of us less familiar with movies, there's also an episode of Tom and Jerry where Tom the cat gets hit on the head, and then he totally forgets that Jerry the mouse is his arch nemesis and thinks that they're buddies, which is a great idea, but obviously not realistic on several levels. Two movies that I have seen are maybe the worst at portraying amnesia, which is Clean Slate and 50 First Dates. Both of these movies operate under the idea that someone with anterograde amnesia, the one where you can't form new memories, will retain memories for a little while. And so what they do is their characters are able to remember approximately 24 hours. They remember things that happen during the day whenever they're awake, and then as soon as they go to sleep, they forget everything. Which is not the case ever. There's not a single known condition where someone has a set time limit on what they can remember and when the anterograde amnesia affects them. In people like HM, real life people who have anterograde amnesia, the important thing to determine how long they'll remember something isn't actually how long they'll remember it. It's not the time span that they have to remember something. It is the amount of information. So if you give a smaller amount, they'll remember it for longer. And it is the sort of the importance of the information, how often it's used. So like I said, HM could hold a conversation. So while he was using the information, he could remember it. But then as soon as he stopped using the information, he couldn't remember it anymore. So those are the two things that really matter in anterograde amnesia, on how long you can remember something, not I have 24 hours to remember this. Or I think I've even seen it in some like medical dramas where someone will remember something for exactly a minute, and so they'll like set timers to see the memory reset, and that's not actually how that would work. So lastly, how do patients with amnesia recover from amnesia? I saw it referenced in this paper as the 2 is better than 1 idea, where a lot of movies will use 2 traumatic brain injuries. And so the first traumatic brain injury will cause the amnesia. And then the second traumatic brain injury will cure the amnesia. Which, I mean, would be great if that's how that worked in real life. It'd be really easy to cure people with amnesia, but it's obviously not. I can't see a single world in which someone getting amnesia or any form of traumatic brain injury, where someone who has a traumatic brain injury and then you hit them on the head again, that's never going to improve the situation. Another thing that movies will often use is to bring in objects from the past. So they'll be like, look at this thing that you used to really love or hold dear, or it's important to a person that you care about, and this will help you remember things that happened in the past. This is based slightly in the truth. That is a technique that can be used to help people with memory loss, to sort of trigger a memory, but the difference is that it triggers a memory. You might be able to get back a small thing that happened, but you're not going to get back all of their memories. It's not going to all come flooding back at once, like it does dramatically in movies where they have like this huge flashback montage. That's just purely unrealistic. Another thing that Hollywood will use a lot of time, which is kind of funny, is that they'll use neurosurgery as a cure for the amnesia. Oftentimes neurosurgery is the cause of the amnesia because you maybe hit something that you weren't supposed to. An issue that we face a lot of times with memory is that in the field of neuroscience, we still don't fully understand it. One of the really big things is that we don't understand where memories are stored. The current theory is that they're not really stored in any particular place. It uses a lot of different parts of your brain. We do know that they're encoded with certain parts of the brain. Certain parts of the brain are necessary to form memories, which is part of the reason why anterograde amnesia exists if you have damage to one of those areas. But we don't know for sure where these memories are located. So during neurosurgery, you might hit something that we didn't know was important, and then you can't form memories anymore, or you forget things. So there's several movies where a character will have lost their memory, and then they'll start raising funds to get neurosurgery, or they'll like start searching for this leading researcher in memory, and they'll get a brain surgery to fix their memory. And that's just not what happens. The last trope that I think movies tend to use a lot is the idea that there are some things that we don't want to remember. So recovery isn't really necessary because the character doesn't want those memories. They don't want them back. An example of this that I kind of like is in Men in Black, whenever the main character that's not Will Smith gets his memory erased, he wanted to have his memory erased. He didn't want to remember those things. And there are some things in life that damage us, that traumatize us, that we don't want to remember, but there's a reason why we do remember them, and it's to learn and to grow. Men in Black is kind of a fantastical example because I think there's probably some stuff there that none of us would want to remember. And I think there are some things that it would be useful to be able to forget to be able to lead a healthy life. But I think a better way to do that is to work through those issues rather than just forgetting them. Work through your trauma rather than avoiding talking about your trauma. Maybe it would be different if we could actually totally erase a memory, but if you are just blocking off a memory, that's, I think, maybe not the healthiest coping mechanism. So I read all of this stuff about here's how Hollywood portrays recovery from amnesia, but I didn't see anything about how we treat it in real life. So I was like, what can you do for someone with amnesia? Because, like I said, we don't know where memories are stored. And if you damage a part of the brain necessary for memory, we don't really have a way to fix that. So what do we do for patients with amnesia? And the main thing that I did find was we do a lot of therapy for them. For example, people who go through a traumatic event and forget the traumatic event for their own safety and protection and mental well-being, that's going to be handled a lot differently than someone who may have received a brain injury and forgotten that event, someone who may have been in a car crash, forgot that, or someone who underwent surgery and now can't form new memories. So if you underwent a traumatic event, the therapy is going to be mostly focused on coping mechanisms, learning how to cope with the trauma that happened to you, learning how to accept it and deal with it properly and in a healthy way. And then maybe someday you will be able to face that memory again, because it's really just blocked off so that you don't have to face it. If the memory loss is due to something where you'll likely never recover the memories, then the therapy is focused more on how to cope with everyday life not having those memories. So how to cope with life not remembering your past, or how to develop mechanisms that will help you move forward not being able to remember things that are happening to you. Hypnosis has also been used to recover memories. There's a lot of really mixed literature on hypnosis on whether or not it works, but it's not harmful, so I would say it's worth a shot. The issue with using hypnosis to recover a memory is that there's a lot of research saying that people who perform hypnosis could possibly implant a false memory or give you leading questions to where you misremember something in a way that it didn't actually happen. So that is the main danger that I can think of with hypnosis, but I mean, if you can't remember something and you're desperate to remember it, I don't think that it could really hurt you, as long as you're skeptical about the answers and think about, is this something that could actually happen, or is this something that I might actually do, type things. Oftentimes people with amnesia are also put on different medications because they are dealing with other comorbidities. So oftentimes people with amnesia might deal with a depression or anxiety due to either the trauma that caused the amnesia or just the trauma that is living without memory. Lastly, people with anterograde amnesia are given different coping mechanisms, different memory aids to use throughout their life. So, for example, they might use a calendar a little bit more intensely than someone who can remember things might. They might use planners. They might take photographs of things that are important to remember, etc. Different things that will help them remember. So that is all that I have to say about Hollywood amnesia. I think it's a really interesting topic. Thank you to Selena for suggesting it. Again, if you would like to suggest a topic or ask a neuroscientist a question, please just email me at this email address or leave it in a comment below. I didn't go too deep into any specific movie because I think, first of all, Hollywood tends to follow a lot of tropes. But secondly, I think it would be really interesting to go through some of these movies individually and see exactly what they think, especially because I haven't seen a lot of them. So I think I probably am going to do that in a future video, maybe take a few examples and go through them a little bit deeper so that we can talk about how amnesia manifests and how memory works, or our current understanding of memory, at least. Thank you for watching this video. If you would like to talk to me or follow me for whatever reason, all of my social medias are here, and also links are in the description box below. All of the sources that I used for this video will also be in the sources, and I hope to see you next Wednesday for another video. Bye.